Well, let's get more on all of this now from the defence editor of the Evening Standard, Robert Fox. Good to see you as always, Robert. Look, it's hard to establish the truth in all of this. I mean, Zelensky absolutely adamant that it hasn't fallen, but if it has, how significant is it as a loss for the Ukrainians?
Well, psychologically, obviously, it is advantage, not necessarily to Russia, but particularly to Mr. Prigozhin, Yevgeny Prigozhin of the Wagner mercenary group. They showed pictures of them being somewhere in and around the center of Bakhmut, what remains of it, yesterday, and that appears to be so. Just to bring you up to date, that the ground force commander, General Syrskyi, has said, yes, but outside, Ukrainian forces are now attempting to surround Bakhmut in a looping, enveloping movement, as it were. This is the kind of setback that, in terms of the information war, Ukraine didn't want. But it's very interesting that I think that a lot of its allies and supporters in the West have already discounted. But it also modifies all the talk about there's going to be a big summer offensive. No, there's going to be a big summer grinding on of this terrible war.
You highlight something very interesting there, Robert, about the internal strife within the Russian forces. So you've got this freelance group, the Wagner Group, and you've basically got them maybe prematurely saying we've got control of Bakhmut, but this is really to send a message to the Kremlin, really, to say we have sustained huge casualties, we've grafted this out for you, we're getting the credit for this, so don't be thinking of taking it.
Yes, but it's very interesting where the Wagner Group is going next. It likes to go to places where it can make money, and it's connected to another big story in the news at the moment. The Wagner Group has started popping up in and around Sudan, and we know that they have been in West Africa, getting involved in gold mines and so on. How does this relate to Bakhmut? Well, part of the Wagner story is, well, we've done our bit, Russia must take over, and we'd like to pull back because Prigozhin wants to send his forces elsewhere, namely to Africa. You're absolutely right, but there's been a big question in the news as to whether Prigozhin himself could make a power bid. That appears to be off for the moment, but there does appear to be a tremendous sorting out on the Russian side. And as that goes on, watch what the Ukrainians will do. They will try to exploit the cracks. They will try and find an opening. That's where they will move in, both physically and psychologically and politically. And that's what the summer offensive is going to be about.
I just find this Wagner thing fascinating, Robert. So basically, Wagner is an army for hire, and they've decided they could make easier money in Sudan with less casualties, probably. Better business for them in Sudan. What size is Wagner? What are their capabilities?
It's very elastic. Their capabilities were not much up till about 4 or 5 years ago, but then they became very present in parts of Africa, particularly in Libya, for example. I don't want to confuse things. They've been involved in Mali. I think it's in the tens of thousands, but not all of those are soldiers. They are in the business, despite the obvious grandstanding by Prigozhin himself, formerly very close to Vladimir Putin. They're in the business for booty. They're in the business for profit. It is what it says on the label, a private military company, a PMC. They're not going to take over the state. They've been extremely valuable because this is what's happening now on the Russian side. Almost to avoid a general mobilization, you're getting all these militias, including companies like the famous Gazprom gas supplier, making their own military companies. It's a very, very difficult and strange way, in modern terms, to run a war.
Speaking about the losses, going back to the situation in Ukraine, I mean, it's thought that there have been heavy losses in the region of thousands on both sides in the battle for Bakhmut. And the fear is that they could go for Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, where there's a rail station next. And we've got breaking news this morning that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has switched to standby and emergency power supply generators. So the situation incredibly grave still in Ukraine. How useful, then, will this trip have been for President Zelensky to the G7 and that promise of those F-16 fighter jets?
Enormously important. We keep on hearing that, yes, there are more packages coming on, whether from Germany or from America, of ammunition and supplies. The trouble is that the Western powers supporting Ukraine at the moment are not producing ammunition at nearly the rate at which it is being consumed. I mean, it's almost at an insane rate. 90,000 shells a month at one time the Ukrainian forces were using. They are extremely vulnerable, Isabel, because they're vulnerable for the reasons you have stated, which is human power. How long can you go on taking the losses like this? The Russian losses have been enormous, but proportionately, I would think that the Ukrainians have been almost as bad. By that, I mean the rate of loss to the population available. It is very dicey. Answer your questions. F-16s, it's the workable workhorse plane, can launch missiles, can cover very closely, intimately, as it's put, ground attacks, and are necessary for that. They're absolutely vital. Can they get there in time? That's the big question.